Breaking news, the Supreme Court has struck down Colorado's ban on conversion therapy. That therapy includes efforts to change an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity during talk therapy. Major American medical groups consider it ineffective and harmful, and 27 states outlaw that practice. But a Christian licensed therapist alleged the Colorado law violates her free speech rights and prevents her from openly talking with clients about their desire to rid themselves of same-sex attractions or better align with their biological sex. Now the High Court has ruled in her favor.
We talked about this earlier this week, this case, Childs versus Salazar. It's a really important case for many different issues, including free speech, but it impacts everybody who does any sort of counseling and could even be something that impacts pastors, youth pastors, things that we can say as believers and more. With me to talk about it is Jeff Johnston. Jeff works as a culture and policy analyst at The Daily Citizen. You can go to theDailyCitizen.org to learn more. Jeff, welcome back to the Pastor Scott Show.
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me on the broadcast.
Yeah, great to have you. So, this is a really big case. I don't know if people understand as much why. Maybe as a pastor, because I was getting all the memos about what's coming as far as what I'm allowed to say or not allowed to say when it comes to counseling people or church counselors, Christian counselors. This is a really big deal for that. Also, free speech for just about any issue. So tell us about what the Supreme Court decided.
Well, you're right. This is a huge victory for free speech and for some other issues as well, which I'll get to in a minute. But in 2019, Colorado passed a law banning what they called conversion therapy for anyone, any minor with same sex attractions or with sexual identity confusion. A little boy, maybe, who thought he wanted to be a little girl. And as a parent, if you had a little boy like that, you couldn't take your child to a licensed clinical counselor to get help for that boy to embrace his bodily reality. So this law really shut down the parental rights, the rights of parents to raise their kids according to their religious beliefs. It shut down free speech for counselors and for clients as well. Let's say you were a 16-year-old boy, like I was, struggling with same-sex attractions and pornography, and you wanted to go see a counselor. You would not be able to do that. And what's happened is, I began my journey out of homosexuality in 1986, and the culture was pretty tolerant at that point still of people like me who had religious beliefs, and we didn't want to live that way. But the culture began to shift the other direction, and there was this push against anyone leaving homosexuality or transgenderism. And so these laws were designed in many ways to keep kids from exploring, how did I get this way? What in my past or my relationships caused me to have to develop these same-sex attractions? And so it really shut down the conversation. And so for the court to rule 8-1 that this law was a violation of freedom of speech and that the state was trying to force a counselor to speak only in one direction, it's huge. And it also affects laws in about 27 other states that have bans on conversion therapy. So it's going to have a big effect on our nation.
When people hear the term conversion therapy, I think what people normally think about is, shock treatments in some camp somewhere and that kind of thing. But what this case is about is just sitting down and being able to talk with a counselor. It's speech. It's just, does the counselor have the right to even address the idea, as you said, if you come to see a counselor and say, hey, I want to talk about why I'm dealing with these things. The counselors, according to these laws, they're not allowed to you really engage in that, as far as I understand it. They had to sort of push back and say, no, what you're feeling is right. Otherwise, they could say nothing.
Yeah, you had to affirm a minor either by saying, "Hey, you are gay. Let me help you accept that," or a child struggling with sexual identity confusion. You had to say, "Yeah, you're not a boy. You really are a girl." So it was only allowing conversation in one direction, which is patently unconstitutional. Um, Ethical counselors aren't doing what the psychiatrists did 60 years ago, aversion therapy. They're not locking little kids up and giving them drugs to make them vomit if they see a picture of a guy.
Right.
Um, all they do is they talk to people, and they might have a different therapeutic angle on things. You know, there's family systems counseling and EMDR and some other types of counseling, but the whole term conversion therapy got lumped onto any kind of help for people who wanted to leave homosexuality or transgenderism. And good counselors, it's unethical to try to force somebody to change. And you can't really do it anyway. I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried to change anyone, but good luck with that one.
Right.
Um, it's hard enough to change yourself.
We've all tried to change people, but that really doesn't work too
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. And good counselors don't do that. And it would be unethical to try to force somebody to do
Yeah.
that.
But
And so
sometimes
this
I was gonna say, but sometimes what's happening is the person there's a pathology, right? There's things going on beyond whatever that issue that might have presented itself or what they came to you to talk about. And there is a lot of success when you can deal with those issues. Sometimes it's abuse or sometimes it's pornography or other things like that. Dealing with that can have an implication on the way people see themselves and act.
Yeah, our attractions, our identity, behaviors, those are all complicated. And a lot of us who struggled with these issues, we could look at our past and say, hey, some of these things might have affected me. You know, in my case, sexual play with other young boys, I knew that affected me.
Mm,
A strain in my relationship with my father, I knew that affected my sense of myself and how I thought about God and how I thought about other men, how I thought about myself as a man. So counseling was super helpful in helping me sort through those different issues, come to some resolution on some of them. And it was never about, you know, I'm going to do this 180 from gay to straight. You
right.
know, um, I don't know any deep issue where, you know, anxiety, depression, where a counselor is going to say, "Hey, I can cure you 100%." So nobody ever promised that. It doesn't work that way. But along the way, as you're dealing with these issues, sometimes thoughts, feelings, identity change along the way. And especially if that's the direction you want to move, a counselor should be free to help you do that. And this decision now is going to cause states and the courts to take a look at these laws and say, hey, we've really been shutting down free speech on this issue.
That's right. You're listening to the Pastor Scott Show. My guest is Jeff Johnson. He's with the Daily Citizen, dailycitizen.org, and we're talking about Supreme Court decision this week that didn't really overturn the law, but it sent it back to lower courts with the idea that these laws aren't going to work. The counselors should have free speech, the ability with talk therapy to talk to people who come into them and say, "Hey, I have these feelings or these inclinations, and I want to talk about it. Maybe I don't want them, or I have religious points of view, and I want to deal with them." And it's a huge case because, as you've said, the the pattern with our laws has been to force counselors, and I believe this was headed towards churches, pastors, youth pastors, anybody dealing with in any sort of counseling role or official role, to force you to affirm lifestyles, even if that or identities, even if that child, in particular, this is dealing with minors. Wants help with it, you weren't allowed to say. And the court ruled 8-1, which I think is very significant. So every justice but one, including two of the three liberal justices, voted with the majority, the conservatives on the court as well.
Yes, the fact that Justice Kagan and Sotomayor concurred with the majority was pretty remarkable. And Kagan even put a little footnote in her decision where she went after Justice Jackson, who opposed this decision, and she said, "You're wrong on this issue." And that the main decision explained why Jackson was wrong on these issues as well. Um, you're right; it didn't shut down the law completely, but the court was really clear. These laws engage in viewpoint discrimination, and they violate religious freedom for counselors. All you're doing is talk therapy. You're not the laws weren't regulating medical actions like, you know, giving somebody surgery or drugs. It was just simple talk therapy. And so we're grateful. There have been several other cases like this, some lost in the courts, some won, but now those courts are going to have to review those decisions and hopefully move towards more free speech, more parental rights, more religious freedom as well. They didn't argue this, but these laws really shut down a person's religious freedom to pursue the kind of counseling they wanted to pursue as well.
Yeah. I've studied this issue for a long time, being in ministry. And, one of the things I think people need to also understand is it's not just Christian people or religious therapists who have objected to these laws. There are lots of even secular, for lack of a better word, counseling organizations that have objected to these things for the very reasons that you mentioned, that they know that in so many cases there are pathologies, there are things to talk about, there are actual therapies that do help people when they ask for help, and they should have the right to do that. That is something that we should definitely want from anybody that we seek counseling for, that they can deal with the truth, that they can really be free to speak their mind and speak into our lives when we've asked them to do so.
You're right. And you had mentioned earlier efforts to shut down pastors and the resources they could provide. Um, California passed a conversion therapy ban in 2012, and it wasn't long after that that they tried to shut down resources, support groups, things you could say in church, books in
Hmm.
California um, that would help people leave homosexuality or transgenderism. They tried to label that consumer fraud. You probably
Yeah, that's
remember
right.
that legislation.
That's right.
And it was the same kind of thing. They were shutting down free speech. The same thing happened with Amazon. They were shutting down books about leaving homosexuality or leaving transgenderism. They wouldn't sell them. So this was part of a broader push to advance the LGBT agenda and to shut down Christian and religious beliefs against that. And you mentioned secular people as well. I led support groups for a number of years, and not everybody that came was a Christian. There were guys who wanted to marry a woman and have a family, but they were struggling with these issues, and so they wanted help as well. And it wasn't for religious reasons; it's they just wanted the freedom to do that. And this decision really importantly allows people to have the freedom to pursue the goals they want, to leave homosexuality or transgenderism.
This is the Pastor Scott Show. My guest is Jeff Johnston. He's with the Daily Citizen. You can go to theDailyCitizen.org to learn more. It is a cultural newsletter from Focus on the Family, newspaper, I guess is what we would call it. Jeff, you were talking about your own experience with this. Tell us about your life now. Are you married? Do you have a family? How did that turn out for you?
Yes, I've been married 32 years now, almost 33. I've got three grown sons. Um, I did not want to go into homosexuality. Well, there were a few years where I did want
Right.
that, but for, for the for the most part, this was not something I asked for. I didn't believe I was born this way. Um, I wanted to follow the Lord. I grew up in a Christian home. I knew what the Bible said about God's design for men and women and marriage and relationships, and I wanted some help pursuing that. So I saw a counselor in California for several years and then shifted over to another counselor, and we didn't like work at you're going to stop trying to be gay. That's not counseling and it's not effective. It was more, hey, sometimes people know contributing factors that might have influenced them in that direction. And it was super helpful for me in a lot of different ways, building relationships, learning how to connect with people, learning what I was feeling inside and thinking, and how to process that well. Counseling was super helpful for that. And there's even a more recent study that just came out that said that men who went to counseling for unwanted homosexuality, even if they didn't change and they went and embraced a gay identity, those men were helped by their counselors.
Hmm.
So the whole idea that this is harmful and damaging to people just isn't true.
And I think that people have to understand with these issues, they're usually in the political world and the legal world, they're couched in issues of civil rights and those kinds of things. But behind it is a completely different issue that really isn't supporting the LGBTQ person, if you will. It's about, in some cases, just full blown Marxism, the idea of destroying the family, which is necessary for that. So to encourage this, and I think you see this a lot with the transgender studies and the things with little kids, especially being pushed in this direction. Um, that is another piece of this, another reason that people need to see through the politics of this issue, especially if they're dealing with it themselves or dealing with somebody that they know. What would you say to somebody who is listening to this and maybe for the first time they're saying, you know what, I've always been told that there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do that makes any sense. What would you say to that person?
Oh, I think there's great hope for anyone who struggles with these issues and for families dealing with these issues. One of the things we've done at Focus on the Family for years is encouraged families, parents to love people struggling with homosexuality or transgenderism. And we've tried to point towards people like me who left homosexuality or transgenderism and say there's hope in the gospel that God is really powerful and changes people. And Christianity is really one of the only groups, Christians are one of the only groups that are standing against, as you mentioned, the LGBT agenda, which sometimes is related to Marxist ideology. The uh, gay and transgender communities have done a masterful job of painting themselves as victims and everyone else is the oppressor. And that comes straight from Marx's ideology that there's these two opposing groups. Um, and while some people have been victimized individually, these are really powerful groups of people who have managed to transform our entire culture. And so it's really important for Christians to get educated and to engage on these issues so that we can present a different narrative to the world.
And it's important for Christians too to be understanding at a deeper level, and that way there can be compassion for people that we know or people in our churches who are struggling with this, or our kids or grandkids. Many people listening, their kids or grandkids or they themselves are dealing with this, and they're afraid to say anything because even from other Christians, they're afraid about being judged, or they're afraid of being misunderstood, particularly about their intentions or their desire to follow Jesus. How would you encourage them, and how would you encourage other Christians when it comes to this issue?
Well, it was men, particularly in the church, who loved me when I was struggling. They didn't understand me. Uh, I don't blame them for that, but they just loved me right where I was. They knew I was kind of an angry, sarcastic, prickly mess, that I wasn't really good at male relationships. And they were willing to put up with me and love me even as I struggled with this. And they called me out on different issues. They loved me enough to do that. But it is so important for believers to reach out both with truth and grace on this issue. Strugglers are often dealing with very painful issues,
Mhm.
relational from their past, all kinds of different things. There was a recent study that showed that those struggling with homosexuality have much higher levels of what they call adverse child experiences
That's right.
than the rest of the population. So you've got these people who've gone through hard things in their past, and they need our love and grace. They also need truth, and they need the Holy Spirit's power to change, and that's what the church offers people.
Well, and that is part of the great thing about our faith is that all of us fall short of the glory of God. We have a Savior who died for us, each one of us. And part of the reason we should be in the church and involved with each other is to build each other up. Because all of us, in one way or another, we struggle and we're a little prickly, as you said, with all kinds of different reasons. We need to be there for each other and point each other to Jesus.
Absolutely. The gospel does two things for us. It says God loves you exactly as you are, and God has the power to bring change to your life. I mean, we all know we're messed up
Yeah.
and we know we need help changing and that's what the gospel gives us. And that's good news for anyone. Whether you're struggling with homosexuality, transgenderism, any other issues, sexuality issues, relationships, and everyone struggles with those issues. But that's the goodness of the gospel that God embraces us as we are and helps transform our lives.
Yeah. Jeff Johnston is my guest from the Daily Citizen. Jeff, tell us in about 30 seconds how people can connect with you and connect with the Daily Citizen and focus on the family.
Well, we have a website, thedailycitizen.org. And at the top of the website page, there's two subscribe buttons. one for our daily news roundup, and the second one for a Friday e-newsletter. We'll give you information about what's happening from a Christian worldview and point you towards helpful resources and also help you engage on these issues so that you're involved in the cultural issues of the day.
That's right. Jeff Johnson, thanks for being with me and thanks for telling your story in the Pastor Scott Show today.
Hey, thanks, Scott. I appreciate it.